What makes a nation rise above all others? How did a group of colonies, once fighting for survival, become the most powerful empire in human history? From revolution to innovation, from world wars to world dominance? This is the story of America's rise to power, the empire that changed the world. Every empire claims greatness. Rome had its legions, Britain its navy, but America had something different. A secret formula of ideas, ambition, and power that no one could match. In this video, we're re-uncovering the real reason why America didn't just rise. It rewrote what global power means. And by the end, you'll understand the hidden blueprint behind the world's most successful empire, and why no one has been able to replace it. Every great empire in history had a story, a moment when the world began to notice its rise. Rome had its legions, Britain had its navy, but America did something entirely different. A power that wasn't born out of ancient bloodlines or centuries of conquest, but from an idea that somehow transformed 13 fragile colonies into the world's most dominant force. When we think about empires, we picture marble statues, emperors, and maps colored in conquest. But America didn't start that way. It began as a rebellion, a desperate struggle against one of the greatest empires of its time, Britain. A ragtag army with limited resources, outnumbered and outgunned, somehow managed to defeat the world's mightiest power. And that victory wasn't just military, it was psychological. It proved that power didn't have to be inherited, it could be created. But here's the question that still puzzles historians, economists, and strategists around the world. How did this nation, which started from scratch, become the global superpower in less than 250 years? Why did other empires crumble, fade, or fracture, while America not only survived, but shaped the modern world itself? To answer that, we need to look deeper than wars or wealth. We need to understand the hidden formula, the secret mechanism that turned America into something far greater than a country. Something closer to a living system, constantly adapting, reinventing, and expanding. The world we know today, from global markets to pop culture, from technology to international politics, all revolves around America's gravitational pull. And whether you admire it or question it, one thing is certain: no empire in history has ever risen this fast or held such influence without ever calling itself an empire. But that's the paradox, isn't it? America was built on rejecting imperialism. Its very foundation was a rebellion against empire, against kings, colonies, and control. Yet somewhere along the way, it became the very thing it once opposed, a global empire unlike any before it. Not by force alone, but by influence, innovation, and ideas. So what changed? What made America's rise so unique, so unstoppable, that even the most ancient powers couldn't keep up? Let's rewind the clock. Picture the world in the late 18th century, an era dominated by monarchies and colonies. Empires were built on bloodlines, divine right, and conquest. The idea of ordinary people governing themselves was unthinkable. Yet across the Atlantic, a radical new experiment was about to begin. The American Revolution wasn't just a war for independence. It was a declaration that power should come from the people, not a crown. That freedom wasn't a privilege, it was a birthright. This revolutionary idea didn't just spark a new nation, it ignited a new way of thinking. But freedom alone doesn't build an empire. What made America different was its hunger, an unshakable belief that it was destined for something greater. The settlers who crossed the Atlantic weren't content with survival. They dreamed of expansion, of discovery, of endless possibility. And that mindset, that restlessness, became the engine of America's rise. While Europe fought over monarchs and borders, America looked west. The frontier became its heartbeat, each generation pushing further, building cities where wilderness once stood, railroads across impossible terrains, industries from raw ambition. And all of it fueled by a single promise, that anyone could rise, no matter who they were. But behind the romantic vision of opportunity lay something more calculated, a deep understanding of economics, resources, and strategy. America's leaders recognized early that power wasn't just about armies, it was about production, innovation, and ideas. They didn't just want to be free, they wanted to be strong enough that no one could take that freedom away. So when the industrial age began, America seized it like no other. Steam engines, telegraphs, electricity, these weren't just inventions. They were weapons in a new kind of war, the war of progress. Every machine, every innovation pushed the nation further ahead, turning the dream of dominance into a reality. But perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is that America's greatest strength didn't come from a single leader or a single moment, it came from its people. A population driven by ambition, risk, and the constant desire to do more. Immigrants from every corner of the globe poured in, bringing skills, ideas, and hope. The result was a melting pot of energy that no single empire could match. And as America grew stronger, the world began to change around it. Old empires started to fade, their colonial systems collapsing under their own weight. But America wasn't conquering land, it was conquering minds. Its culture, its economy, its technology, they spread like wildfire, reaching every continent, shaping how people lived, worked, and dreamed. By the dawn of the 20th century, something extraordinary had happened. The United States was no longer the student, it had become the teacher. The world began to measure itself by American standards, its industries, its democracy, its culture. The once rebellious colonies had become the blueprint for modern civilization. Yet the real mystery remains. How could a nation so young, barely out of its infancy compared to the great empires of history, achieve what took others millennia? Was it luck? Vision? Geography? Or something far more deliberate? A secret understanding of how to wield power in an age of change? That's the question we're about to explore. Because America's rise wasn't just historical, it was strategic. And buried within its story are lessons that reveal not only how it rose so fast. Before America was powerful, it was fragile, a collection of 13 scattered colonies clinging to the edge of a vast and unfamiliar continent. Each colony had its own struggles, its own fears, its own dreams. They were divided by geography, language, and even faith. But beneath those differences burned a shared resentment, a quiet fury toward the empire that ruled them from across the ocean. For decades, the British Empire had stretched its control over the American colonies, demanding loyalty and taxes while offering little freedom in return. The colonists worked the land, built towns, and traded goods, yet they had no voice in the laws that governed them. No taxation without representation wasn't just a slogan, it was a cry for dignity, for recognition. And that cry would soon spark a revolution that would change the course of history. But the American Revolution wasn't simply about escaping British control. It was something deeper, a bold experiment to prove that a nation could be built not by kings, not by empires, but by the people themselves. The world had never seen anything like it. This wasn't just rebellion, it was reinvention. Imagine the scene, a group of men gathered in Philadelphia in 1776, signing a document that dared to defy the most powerful empire on earth. The Declaration of Independence wasn't only a political act, it was a declaration of vision. These men believed that freedom wasn't a privilege granted by rulers, but a natural right granted by existence itself. That idea, radical, dangerous, and revolutionary, would become the seed from which a new kind of empire would grow. The founding generation didn't see America as a finished product. They saw it as an experiment, one that would be constantly tested, reshaped, and renewed. They imagined a land where innovation, ambition, and individual effort would define success. And that belief in limitless potential would become the foundation of everything America would later achieve. But freedom alone wasn't enough to build a nation. The revolution left America broke, exhausted, and divided. The country faced chaos. No standing army, no stable currency, no unified government. Many believed the young nation would collapse before it even began. Yet, in that uncertainty, the founding fathers saw opportunity. They understood that the true strength of a nation wasn't just in its armies or wealth, but in its ideas. When they crafted the Constitution, they didn't just write laws. They built a framework for power that could evolve. Checks and balances, federalism, the Bill of Rights, these weren't just political mechanisms. They were safeguards for innovation. The founders knew that change was inevitable, and they built a system flexible enough to adapt without breaking. And that's what set America apart from the very beginning. Unlike empires of the past that ruled through fear and hierarchy, America built its foundation on participation and progress. It invited its citizens, at least over time, to shape its destiny. The government wasn't a master. It was a servant of the people. And that mindset created a society hungry for achievement. In Europe, success was inherited. In America, it was earned. Land, once reserved for nobility, was now open to anyone bold enough to claim it. Education spread, trade flourished, and ambition became a virtue. The idea that anyone can rise began as a hope and quickly became a reality. That belief, that upward momentum, became the beating heart of the American identity. And as the nation expanded, so did its dreams. The concept of manifest destiny, the belief that America was meant to stretch from ocean to ocean, gave purpose to its growth. It wasn't just about territory. It was about destiny. Every frontier conquered, every invention created, every risk taken was fueled by the same unshakable idea that this nation was chosen to lead, to explore, to redefine what was possible. But let's be clear, the rise wasn't pure. It came with contradictions and cost. The same country that preached freedom allowed slavery to persist. The same nation that celebrated equality denied it to millions. Yet even within those contradictions lay something powerful, a restless spirit of correction, of evolution. America was never static. It was always reaching, always striving to align its ideals with its reality. And while other nations built empires through conquest, America built its empire through expansion of thought. It didn't just conquer land, it conquered the imagination. From the Revolution onward, it presented itself not as an empire of dominance, but as an empire of example, a place where ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Every generation that followed inherited that same revolutionary fire. Farmers became entrepreneurs, soldiers became statesmen, inventors became icons. The foundation laid by those early visionaries gave rise to a culture of risk-taking and reinvention that would one day dominate the world stage. What began as a desperate fight for survival became a blueprint for global influence. The Founding Fathers had unknowingly designed more than a nation. They had created a system capable of self-renewal. Each crisis, each conflict, each reinvention only made it stronger. The revolution was not a single moment in time. It was a living idea that would echo through centuries. And so, from that fragile beginning, from the smoke of rebellion and the ink of the Constitution, emerged a force unlike any before it. A nation that defined power not by its conquests, but by its convictions. A nation built on the belief that destiny wasn't inherited, it was created. A nation whose foundation wasn't stone or crown, but an idea so powerful it refused to die. The American Revolution gave birth to freedom, but it was the industrial age that gave birth to power. What came next would transform the United States from a struggling young republic into a force so vast and dynamic that it would reshape not only its own destiny, but the destiny of the entire world. This was not just a period of growth. It was a transformation so profound that it turned a nation of farmers and dreamers into the engine of modern civilization. In the early 19th century, America was still finding its identity. Its cities were small, its population scattered, and its resources largely untapped. But beneath that quiet surface, something was stirring, an energy, an urgency, a hunger to create. The world was changing, and America refused to be left behind. The Industrial Revolution had begun in Europe, but when it reached American soil, it evolved into something entirely new. This was not just industry, it was ambition made visible. The arrival of the steam engine and the spread of mechanized factories ignited a revolution that would touch every aspect of American life. Cotton mills in the South, steel furnaces in the North, railroads slicing through endless plains, each innovation became a piece of a vast and growing puzzle. America was building something more than wealth. It was building momentum. The railroads became the arteries of a new empire. They didn't just connect cities, they connected dreams. Suddenly, distance was no longer an obstacle, it was an invitation. Settlers could travel west, goods could move east, and for the first time, the United States began to feel like one unified, breathing organism. The sound of locomotives thundering across the land was more than progress. It was power in motion. But with industry came individuals, visionaries who saw opportunity where others saw chaos. Men like Andrew Carnegie, who turned steel into the backbone of modern America. John D. Rockefeller, who built an empire from oil. J.P. Morgan, who mastered finance and shaped the country's economic future. And Henry Ford, who transformed the very way the world worked and moved. These weren't just businessmen. They were architects of a new era. Their factories were the new cathedrals of progress, and their machines were the engines of empire. Yet what made America's industrial rise different was not just the scale of production, it was the mindset behind it. While Europe's industries were often bound by tradition, America's were driven by reinvention. Nothing was too sacred to change, too established to improve. A farmer could become an inventor. A mechanic could become a millionaire. The idea that success was limited by birth or class was shattered, replaced by a belief that innovation could rewrite anyone's destiny. And innovation thrived. Telegraph lines connected towns in seconds. Electricity turned nights into days. Steamships carried goods across oceans faster than ever before. Every invention seemed to spark another, every breakthrough opening a door to something greater. America was no longer following the world, it was leading it. The nation had become a living laboratory of progress. Factories multiplied, cities expanded, and the population exploded. Immigrants arrived by the millions, each carrying their own piece of the American dream. They built railroads, worked the assembly lines, laid the bricks of new skyscrapers that pierced the sky. For them, America wasn't just a country, it was a promise, a place where effort met opportunity. But the rise of industry was not without cost. The smoke of progress darkened the skies. The gap between the rich and the poor widened. Cities grew overcrowded, labor strikes shook the foundations of progress, and corruption seeped into the systems of power. Yet, even in the midst of turmoil, there was something unstoppable about America's forward motion. Conflict, in a strange way, became fuel. Every challenge became another problem to solve, another innovation waiting to be born. By the dawn of the 20th century, America had done what no other nation had ever accomplished in such a short time. In just a few generations, it had transformed from a frontier society into the workshop of the world. Its factories were producing more steel, coal, and oil than entire continents. Its inventions, from the light bulb to the telephone, were reshaping how humanity lived and communicated. And this wasn't just material progress, it was cultural transformation. The spirit of invention became the core of American identity. The idea that anything was possible, that no problem was too big, no dream too bold, this became the country's greatest export. Innovation wasn't just a tool for survival, it was a symbol of destiny. The world began to watch with awe. Europe's old powers realized they were witnessing something new, an empire built not by conquest, but by creativity. America didn't just produce goods. It produced ideas, systems, and technologies that made others dependent on its progress. The industrial boom had given it something far more powerful than wealth. It had given it influence. From the roaring furnaces of Pittsburgh to the shipyards of New York, from the oil fields of Texas to the car factories of Detroit, a new kind of empire had been forged, one fueled by machines, powered by ambition, and driven by an endless thirst for advancement. America had found its formula, innovation as the new weapon, progress as the new conquest, and industry as the new battlefield. And as the smoke of the factories rose higher, one thing became clear. The United States was no longer a young republic finding its footing. It was becoming something greater, something unstoppable. The gears of the new world were turning, and at the center of it all was America. By the early 20th century, America had transformed itself from a nation of pioneers and factories into a continental power, but something far greater was on the horizon. The industrial boom had filled its cities with wealth, its ports with ships, and its people with ambition. Yet, while America was rising, the world around it was beginning to fall apart. Old empires were colliding, monarchies were trembling, and a storm was gathering that would pull the United States into a role it had never sought, that could never escape, the role of a global leader. For over a century, America had tried to stay out of the world's conflicts. It followed the principle of isolation, focusing inward, building strength at home while avoiding the entanglements of Europe's endless rivalries. The oceans were seen as walls of protection. The Atlantic and Pacific weren't just bodies of water. They were barriers between the young republic and the chaos of the old world, but history has a way of finding even those who hide from it. When World War I erupted in 1914, America watched from a distance. European empires clashed with a brutality the world had never seen. Trenches stretched for miles, machine guns tore through generations, and poison gas darkened the skies. For years, the United States resisted the call to join, insisting it was not its fight. Yet, as the war dragged on, the world economy began to shift, and American factories roared to life once again, this time not for railroads or automobiles, but for weapons, ammunition, and supplies. The war that was supposed to remain over there began to touch every corner of American life. Ships were sunk, trade routes threatened, and finally, the line was crossed. In 1917, the United States entered the war, not just as a participant, but as the deciding factor. The arrival of fresh American troops and vast industrial resources turned the tide. And when the dust settled, something remarkable had happened. The old powers of Europe were broken, exhausted, and in debt. America had emerged not as a distant observer, but as a global creditor holding the financial reins of a shattered world. It was the moment when the United States first tasted what global power truly felt like. Yet, when the war ended, America recoiled again. It helped win the fight, but refused to lead to peace. The League of Nations, the first attempt at a global governing body, was born without its most powerful member. America returned home, wary of foreign entanglements, eager to enjoy its roaring 20s, a decade of jazz, prosperity, and invention. But the illusion of isolation wouldn't last long. The Great Depression that followed struck not only the United States, but every corner of the world. The global economy had become too interconnected to ignore. And as nations fell into chaos, darker forces began to rise, dictators, fascist movements, and ambitions for domination. While America wrestled with its own economic crisis, Europe was arming itself for another war, one even more devastating than the last. When World War II exploded in 1939, America once again tried to stay neutral. But neutrality became impossible. The bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941 shattered any remaining distance between the U.S. and the world's fate. In that single moment, the sleeping giant awakened. America entered the war not just to survive, but to lead. Factories that once produced cars now churned out tanks and planes. Women filled the workforce, men filled the battlefields. And together they built a machine of war unlike anything history had ever seen. America became the arsenal of democracy, its industrial might feeding not just its own armies, but those of its allies. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, American soldiers carried not only weapons but an idea that tyranny could be defeated and freedom could prevail. When the war ended in 1945, the world had changed forever. Europe lay in ruins, Asia in chaos. Two superpowers stood tall, the United States and the Soviet Union, and between them stretched a new kind of battlefield ideology. The Cold War had begun, and America once again found itself in uncharted territory. But unlike the empires of old, the United States did not rebuild the world by conquest, it rebuilt it by design. Through the Marshall Plan, it poured billions into reconstructing Europe. Through institutions like the United Nations, NATO, and the World Bank, it helped create a global system shaped in its own image. Dollars replaced empires, influence replaced occupation. The United States had learned that power could be exercised not only through force, but through structure, through the creation of a world order that others would depend on. American culture began to spread alongside its politics. Its movies, its music, its technology all became symbols of modernity. Even those who opposed American policies couldn't escape its influence. The very idea of progress became synonymous with the American model. While the Soviet Union expanded its military and ideology, America expanded its economy and ideals. Wars were no longer fought only with bullets, they were fought with ideas, with innovation, with alliances. The race for space, the arms race, the spread of capitalism, These became the new fronts of a global struggle. And through it all, America positioned itself as both a protector and a provider, ensuring that no global event could move without its participation. The transformation was complete. The once isolated republic had become the central axis of world affairs. From the ashes of 2 world wars, America had stepped onto the stage not just as another nation, but as the architect of a new world order, one that would define the 20th century and beyond. When the guns of World War II fell silent, the United States stood alone at the top. Its cities were intact, its factories humming, its currency stable. The rest of the world, scarred and rebuilding, looked to America not just for aid, but for direction. For the first time in history, a superpower didn't need to conquer to control. America had discovered a new kind of weapon, one that didn't rely on soldiers or bombs. It was the power to influence, to shape minds, markets, and dreams. The battlefield had changed. The Cold War wasn't fought with swords or spears, but with symbols. The United States understood that true dominance didn't come from fear, it came from fascination. To lead the modern world, you didn't have to occupy nations, you had to occupy imagination. And that became America's greatest strategy. While the Soviet Union expanded through force, America expanded through culture. The blue jeans, the movies, the music, the cars, they weren't just products. They were messages wrapped in the promise of freedom and success. A Coca-Cola bottle, a Hollywood film, or a jazz record carried with it an image of life that millions longed for. It was subtle, invisible, and unstoppable. The world didn't realize it at first, but they weren't just consuming American goods, they were consuming the American dream. Hollywood became the empire's greatest ambassador. Films projected images of heroes, rebellion, and triumph. They made the American way of life look thrilling, modern, and irresistible. When a movie ended, the audience didn't just remember the story, they remembered the feeling of possibility. That was America's secret. It didn't force you to follow. It made you want to. The same influence flowed through music. Jazz, blues, rock and roll, each genre was more than entertainment. It was a declaration of individuality and creativity. When Elvis Presley danced or when Louis Armstrong played, it wasn't just sound, it was identity. It was the idea that anyone, anywhere, could be extraordinary. Music became a bridge across nations and languages, carrying with it the rhythm of freedom. But while culture shaped hearts, economics shaped nations. The US dollar, backed by unmatched industrial strength, became the world's financial foundation. After the war, as Europe rebuilt under the Marshall Plan, America's currency became the global standard. Oil, trade, and international loans all flowed through the dollar. Every country that joined the new global economy did so on America's terms. It was empire through economics, influence through interdependence. Corporations became the new legions of power. Companies like General Motors, IBM, and later Apple and Microsoft became global icons. They exported not only technology, but ideology, efficiency, innovation, and ambition. The free market wasn't just an economic model, it was a belief system. Nations that embraced it often found themselves orbiting around the American sun. Television soon joined the front lines of influence. The glowing box in every home became a silent teacher, spreading American values far beyond its borders. The sitcoms, news anchors, and commercials portrayed a lifestyle of abundance, comfort, and optimism. The message was clear: this is what success looks like. And the world listened. Even in education and science, America led with inspiration. The space race wasn't just about reaching the moon. It was about showing humanity what was possible. When Neil Armstrong took that first step, the world didn't just see an astronaut. They saw the embodiment of human potential. That moment, broadcast across the globe, wasn't only an American victory, it was a triumph of imagination. But perhaps America's greatest power was its narrative, the story it told about itself. The story of the self-made man, the pioneer spirit, the dreamer who could rise from nothing and change the world. It was a story that transcended borders and languages because it touched something universal: hope. While other nations enforced obedience, America exported aspiration. It convinced the world that freedom and opportunity weren't luxuries. They were rights. However, influence always carries a double edge. As America's culture spread, so did its contradictions. The same movies that glorified freedom also exposed inequality. The same music that united people also questioned authority. In shaping the world, America was also shaping itself, constantly balancing its ideals with its realities. And yet, through all its internal struggles, its message endured. Even those who opposed American politics couldn't resist its culture. The genes, the movies, the technology, they became universal symbols of modern life. From the streets of Paris to the markets of Tokyo, from the deserts of the Middle East to the cities of South America, the influence was everywhere, often invisible, but always present. The genius of America's soft power was that it didn't demand loyalty, it inspired imitation. Nations wanted to build their own Hollywoods, their own Silicon Valleys, their own Wall Streets. America's strength wasn't just in what it created, but in what it made others believe they could create too. This new empire didn't need borders. Its territory was the human mind, its army was culture, and its weapon was aspirations. While empires before it ruled through fear and might, America ruled through fascination and momentum. Every song played, every film watched, every innovation adopted, all became threads in a vast web of influence woven across continents and generations. And as the decades passed, that web only grew stronger. The flag no longer needed to be planted. Its ideals were already rooted deep within the world's consciousness. The 21st century dawned with America at its peak. It had outlasted its rivals, won the Cold War, and stood as the unchallenged superpower of the modern world. Its military stretched across continents, its currency ruled global markets, and its technology shaped the future. From Silicon Valley to Wall Street, from Hollywood to Washington, the pulse of the world seemed to beat to an American rhythm. But behind the glow of supremacy, something else was beginning to stir. Questions, doubts, and fractures in the very foundation that had built this empire of influence. After the fall of the Soviet Union, America found itself in an unfamiliar position. For decades, it had defined itself in opposition to a rival, a global struggle of ideologies. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control. But now, with its competition gone, America stood alone atop a world it had helped to design. It was a moment of triumph, but also a test. What happens when an empire has no enemy left to fight? The 1990s became an age of confidence. The internet was born, the economy soared, and globalization connected nations in ways never before imagined. American technology companies began to rise as the new giants of power: Microsoft, Intel, Apple, later Google, and Amazon. Their reach extended far beyond borders, carrying American innovation into every home, every device, every pocket. Power was no longer measured in land or armies, it was measured in information, in data, in the invisible threads that connected billions of people to the same digital world. But as America's influence expanded, so did its vulnerabilities. The same global system that made it rich also made it exposed. The attack on September 11, 2001, shattered the illusion of invincibility. In a single morning, the world's most powerful nation was reminded that even an empire built on technology and might could be shaken to its core. The war on terror that followed reshaped American foreign policy for an entire generation. The fight wasn't just about territory anymore, it was about ideology, about protecting a way of life from threats that could appear anywhere, anytime. While America projected power overseas, at home it began to face new kinds of battles: economic inequality, political division, and cultural polarization. The same innovation that had once united the nation now began to divide it. Social media amplified voices, but it also fractured truth. The internet that once connected the world became a battlefield of ideas and influence, often turning its power inward. America was still the center of the world's communication, but the message had become more chaotic. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the fragility of the global economy that America had helped create. Wall Street's collapse rippled across continents, proving that the empire of finance could tremble as easily as any ancient throne. Yet even in crisis, the world looked to America for solutions. Its currency remained the safe haven, its markets the heartbeat of global trade. No matter how unstable things seemed, the system built on American design continued to endure. Then came new challengers. China's rise as a technological and economic force began to redefine global balance. Russia reasserted itself on the geopolitical stage. The world that once seemed unipolar, centered entirely around American dominance, began to tilt toward multipolarity. The 21st century was no longer about who had the most land or armies, but who could control technology, energy, and information. Yet even as competitors emerged, America's cultural and technological influence remained unmatched. Its companies still led innovation. Its universities still produced the world's thinkers. Its music, fashion, and film still shaped global identity. Even in criticism, even in resistance, the world continued to speak the language America had taught it, the language of freedom, expression, and reinvention. But inside the empire, something was changing. The confidence that had once defined America was giving way to uncertainty. Debates about identity, justice, and direction intensified. Generations that had grown up in prosperity began questioning the system that built it. The promise of the American dream, once the nation's greatest export, started to feel distant to many within its own borders. Still, every empire in history has faced this moment, the point where it must decide whether it can adapt or collapse. For America, adaptation has always been its secret strength. From revolution to industry, from world wars to digital empires, it has reinvented itself time and again. The question now is whether it can do it once more in a world that's changing faster than ever. Technology is reshaping power in ways no empire before could imagine. Artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, climate change, and global migration are creating challenges that cannot be solved with armies or alliances alone. The new battleground is invisible, fought in networks, algorithms, and ideas. And once again, America stands at the center of it, both leading the charge and struggling to keep up with its own creations. The story of modern America is one of paradox. It is both admired and criticized, powerful and divided, innovative and uncertain. It dominates the global stage, yet questions its own role in the play. Every invention, every crisis, every election becomes not just an American moment, but a global event. The world still looks to it, not just for leadership, but for direction, for meaning, for possibility. Through triumphs and turmoil, one truth continues to echo. America's empire was never built solely on land or wealth or weapons. It was built on an idea that change is not something to fear, but something to harness. And that belief, as turbulent as it may be, remains its greatest strength. The modern empire stands at a crossroads once again, tested not by external enemies, but by the weight of its own history and the endless question of what comes next. So, what truly made America rise from a fledgling colony to the most powerful empire the modern world has ever known? It wasn't just military strength or economic dominance, it was something deeper. It was the belief that progress was inevitable, that innovation was destiny, and that ideas could be more powerful than empires built on stone. From the early dreamers who crossed oceans in search of freedom, to the industrial titans who turned ambition into steel and skyscrapers. From the soldiers who fought on distant shores, to the thinkers and artists who redefined culture, America's story has always been one of reinvention. It is the tale of a nation that learned not only how to conquer the world's challenges, but how to inspire it. Every generation of Americans has faced the same question: what do we do with this power? And while the answers have changed, the pursuit of purpose has not. The United States continues to shape the modern world, not by force alone, but through influence, technology, and vision. Its empire is one not of borders, but of belief, a living idea that freedom, innovation, and hope can transform nations. Yet the greatest test of any empire is not how it rises, but how it endures. As America stands on the edge of a new era, one defined by digital revolutions, climate crises, and global interconnection, its legacy will depend on whether it can once again evolve without losing what made it extraordinary. The world still watches, still questions, still imitates, because even after centuries of change, one thing remains clear: the story of America's rise is not just history, it is a mirror reflecting humanity's own journey toward power, progress, and possibility, and perhaps the greatest secret of all. is that the American empire was never about conquering the world, it was about changing it forever.